Sweet Peaches, a Tombstone fanfiction written by Jukebox Straws. Read by Jukebox Straws. Wyatt stared at Doc from across the faro table. It seemed a lot of their long nights started that way nowadays, with longing stares and trembling hearts that would soon lead to whatever shenanigans creatures of the night got up to. But Doc was not looking at him in return, as the lawman had expected. Instead, he was purposely ignoring Wyatt, staring intently at his poker hand. Wyatt could see Doc's finger tapping impatiently against the table, as well as his anxious leg bouncing underneath it. Doc set down his hand and smirked to mask his thinning patience. "Evening, gentlemen." The gambler stood and collected the small amount of coins and paper bills that had been placed on the center of the table. He slipped the money into his pocket before getting up and quickly going outside via the saloon's back door. Wyatt followed him. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end at the chilly Arizona night air. The moon was full tonight, and it lit up the desert as if it were day. Full moon could only mean trouble, Wyatt thought. Doc was waiting for him, pressed up against the wooden planks of the building covered by large, casting shadows. "Doc, what's wrong?" Wyatt asked. Doc took off his hat and pinned Wyatt to the wall. The lawman suddenly realized the stupidity of his question. "Wyatt?" Doc whispered as he looked into his friend's eyes. Wyatt looked down at Doc's mouth and saw exactly what he thought he would, fangs glistening in the light of the moon and the shadows that covered them both. "It's been a week. I need to feed again. Doc, it's a full moon tonight. We won't make it halfway to your room before I go berserk." "I can't wait any longer," Doc growled and bared his teeth, as if that would convince Wyatt to endanger himself or his friend any more. "We can't do it here. Someone could see us." Wyatt pushed Doc's shoulders. "I don't care anymore. I need to feed Wyatt, please." Doc pressed his forehead to Wyatt's shoulder with a heavy sigh. The lawman combed his fingers through the gambler's hair. "Christ, Doc. Christ is not in this town, Wyatt. Otherwise we wouldn't be here." Wyatt let out a tired chuckle. "We could make a run for it. Try using your coat." Doc took off his heavier trench coat and let Wyatt use it to shield himself from the moonlight as if they were in a heavy monsoon. "Let's give it a try." They ran as fast as they could towards the hotel, ducking behind buildings to keep Wyatt out of the moonlight as much as possible. Wyatt could feel it, the beast living inside him trying to break free every time the light touched him. He kept that beast locked in a cage, but the moon was the key. It was at its fullest tonight, bright beams piercing Wyatt's skin like white fire. He let out growls of frustration as he felt his teeth aching and changing shape. Is this how Doc felt every time his fangs came out? He thought to himself. His nails grew darker, hardened, claw-like. "Doc, I'm not gonna make it!" Wyatt stayed behind in the shadow of another saloon as Doc ran ahead of him. Doc stopped and turned back. "You're gonna have to! We're almost there!" I can't!" Wyatt was shaking, holding onto his arms as they were covered in thick brown fur, the same color as his hair. He felt his muzzle beginning to show, and his clothes felt strangely tight. Maddie was going to kill him if he ruined another outfit. "I'm gonna lose myself if I touch the light again, Doc." Doc looked at the hotel, just one building away. A decent gap between the two structures allowed for the moonlight to seep in, creating a beastly barrier between the young vampire and what he so desperately needed. The werewolf at his side was barely hanging on to the final shreds of his humanity, and Doc had to make a decision. Let his friend's transformation finish, or stay here with him and not satisfy himself. "It's okay, Wyatt. I'm here." Doc kneeled next to Wyatt, and they both sat on the hard-packed dirt. Wyatt took deep, strangling breaths as Doc rubbed a hand between his shoulder blades. He found that was the quickest way to get his friend to calm down. The lawman's breathing evened after a minute, and Doc felt his need growing. He kept eyeing Wyatt's furry neck, even when he didn't mean to. Wyatt had been graciously allowing Doc to feed off him since Dodge City, when he had accidentally confessed his secret to his newfound friend during a drunken rant. Being a creature of the shadows himself, Wyatt was not at all surprised or disgusted by Doc's true nature. They had both been turned when they were young, they realized, so they had simply grown used to living this way. It was just a simple fact of their twisted, upside-down lives. "Doc, Wyatt whispered after a while. Why do you have to feed off me every time? What makes me so special? Wyatt raised an eyebrow in genuine curiosity. Doc smiled. I don't know, he shrugged. I just prefer you. Everyone else in this town is bitter and tasteless. The gambler combed his fingers through Wyatt's hair and scratched behind his ear. Wyatt's newly sprouted tail began to wag. He pressed a gentle kiss to Wyatt's forehead. The lawman blushed, trying to stop his tail from kicking up a dust storm. Stop it! Wyatt whispered to his tail, grabbing it. Doc let out a snorting chuckle. I have a question for you now, my friend. Doc absent-mindedly continued to pet the lawman like a puppy. Okay. What does it feel like when you transform? Having these dog-like tendencies is sure to be a strange feeling, I reckon. It is a little weird, I suppose. Wyatt looked up from the night sky full of far-off stars. I act completely normal the rest of the month, but on this one specific night, the beast inside me gets restless. I know the feeling, Doc muttered, running his tongue over his teeth. Maybe that's why we were drawn to each other, huh, Doc? Kinda sappy of the universe, don't you think, putting the two outcasts together like this? I've heard that fate does so often have such a wry sense of humor. Wyatt sat up and looked across the gap to the hotel. I think we can make it. We gotta hurry, though. Are you sure? Doc stood as Wyatt prepared himself to run, pulling the gambler's coat over himself again, though it was a bit too small to provide any sort of protection now. Yeah, you help me. It's only fair that I help you. The lawman smiled at his friend. Doc could barely remember the sprint across the gap, or their frantic running up the stairs to the hotel room. All he remembered was holding tight to Wyatt's hand as he felt claws dig into his skin. He smelled his own blood in the air as he slammed the door shut and locked it. Wyatt growled as he found the only spot in the room without moonlight, the dark corner. Doc quickly drew the curtains, hissing at the pain in his hand. He lit a lamp, replacing the cold blue of the moon with the warm orange of fire. Wyatt? The young vampire turned to his friend. Wyatt was still huddled in the corner of the room, pawing at the wood, letting out small huffs. Doc tried to get closer. The feral growling from the lawman pricked his ears. Doc! Wyatt's voice was gravelly, rough, barely human. Don't come any closer. Wyatt, just calm down. Doc tried to touch him. Wyatt snarled at him. Don't, he snapped. His ears drooped, and he whimpered like a lost puppy. I don't want to hurt you, Doc. You won't. I'm immortal, remember? The gambler tried to lighten the mood with a joke. Wyatt sniffled a bit. Let me help you, Wyatt. The lawman flexed his hands, hiding his claws under his armpits. You sure I won't hurt you? Promise. Doc coaxed Wyatt's furry hand into his and slowly helped him stand and walk over to the bed and sit down. You can stay here till the morning. I'm sure Maddie will understand the urgency of your situation that caused you not to return last night. She probably thinks I'm out slaughtering rabbits or something. Wyatt's voice became more human as he regained a small semblance of control. He began to whimper again, and Doc's heart shattered. He held Wyatt close to him, pressing the lawman's head against his chest. Oh, quit babying me, Wyatt pushed back, shaking himself off as if he just received a bath. You still need to feed, don't you? Well, yes. Doc felt his fangs prick the inside of his mouth again. Wyatt unbuttoned his shirt, dark fur fluffing up with the chilly air of the room. Well, go on. Wyatt leaned his head back, exposing his neck to his friend. Doc cleared his throat. Are you absolutely sure? For God's sake, Doc, yes, Wyatt sighed. We've been doing this for how many years now? Wolf or no wolf, it's still my blood. I'm not gonna go feral on you, honest. Just get it over with. Doc smiled fondly before leaning in. Wyatt's blood was sweet, which for a lawman hardened by bullets, desert sand, and cold steel, made Doc chuckle at the irony of it. Doc supposed that was what drew him to Wyatt in the first place, what made the gambler trust him so easily. That sweet scent was like the most powerful drug to Doc Holliday, and he would willingly indulge in it as long as his Wyatt would let him. The flinch was involuntary. Wyatt wasn't scared of Doc, but his body naturally responded to the tiny prick of the vampire's fangs sinking into his skin. His tail stiffened, and his claws instinctively dug into the sheets, but he quickly loosened his grip. He knew Doc would have to pay out of pocket if the sheets got damaged. "Hey, Doc." Wyatt opened one eye as Doc pulled his mouth away from Wyatt's neck. "Hmm?" The gambler wiped his mouth on his handkerchief. "What does my blood taste like?" "You've never had your own blood in your mouth before, lawman?" "Well, yeah, but I want to know your opinion." Wyatt's tail flicked back and forth, genuinely curious. This was another thing Doc felt drew him to Wyatt. When he revealed his secret, the lawman took quite an active interest in his vampiristic abilities. It was cute, the gambler thought. Not that he'd ever tell Wyatt that, he'd never hear the end of it. "You're surprisingly sweet," Doc smiled. Wyatt's ears flopped, and he sighed as he laid down on the bed. "Really?" Wyatt gave the most unconvinced stare. Doc took off his tie and laid beside him. "Yes, really," Doc chuckled. "Why, you're sweeter than a ripe Georgia peach, my Wyatt." Wyatt was grateful that the fur covering his face hid his blush. The comfortable silence between them lasted, even as Doc stood up to bring a fresh pair of drinks to the bed. Wyatt gingerly held the glass in his huge paws, resisting the urge to lap at the whiskey like a parched animal. "Wyatt?" "Yeah?" "Since I answered your question, will you indulge one of mine?" "Okay." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Now, forgive me if I offend you." Doc lit a cigarette. "But I've heard a lot of hearsay about werewolves, and I must say you don't fit the stigma in the slightest. I figured the first time you transformed, you would have lost your mind and torn me to shreds." "So, what's your question?" "You said there's a beast inside of you. What does that feel like?" Wyatt looked down at his glass, tapping it with his claw. "Well, it sort of feels like pins and needles all over my body on the outside. On the inside, it feels like my insides are churning. That's why I can't eat a whole lot on full moon nights. I get pretty nauseous." Doc nodded, taking a drag from his cigarette. "It's weird, really. In my mind, when I change, it's like there's a monster fighting for control of my brain." Wyatt looked down at his hands. "At first, it was so hard to keep it deep down. I was ashamed of it, I reckon. I still am. A little. But then I met you." Doc blinked. "Me?" "Yeah, after I met you, it got easier somehow. The monster didn't really want to come out anymore, you know? Suppose it knew I didn't really want to hurt you. So it turned you into a sweet-tasting, peachy puppy dog?" "Oh, hush!" Wyatt pushed Doc a bit. The gambler chuckled a bit as whiskey spilled from his glass. He didn't mind, though. "I suppose fate truly did bring us together, then." Doc finished his drink and set the glass down. Wyatt's tail began to wag. Doc thought that was absolutely adorable. "Yeah," Wyatt smiled, laying his head in Doc's lap. Doc ran his fingers through Wyatt's fur, smiling softly. They'd both probably spend the rest of the night like this, and both men were perfectly okay with that. "Yeah, suppose it did." The end.